Welcome to the July 7th, 2021 Board of Zoning Appeals meeting. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I'm going to start with a roll call. Gillian, I know she's going to be absent tonight. Jeff?
Here.
Frank?
Here.
Joel?
Here.
And Jonathan, I'm here as well. Next, we'll go to staff announcements. Kelly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Middle Tennessee section of TAPA, the Tennessee chapter of the American Planning Association, is going to provide training for the Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission members on November 5th from 8 a.m. to noon. They're putting together a good mix of topics that will provide the full 4 hours of required training for BZA members each year. We'll update you with more information on the topics and how to register later this year. It's a free training and it'll be held virtually, and we can also play that at City Hall as well if you'd like to come here to watch. I'd also like to formally welcome Victoria Hensley, our new planner, to the city. She is going to be taking over the role of staff liaison for the Board of Zoning Appeals. She has her master's degree in public history and is working on her dissertation in planning and preservation. So welcome, Victoria. And I'd also like to thank Eric for his work over the past months while we've had a vacancy in the position. He's been doing his long-range planning work as well as a significant number of BZA cases for us and has done an excellent job keeping that torch going. So thank you, Eric, for all of that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. We appreciate your work, and if you need some Kleenex, let us know before the meeting ends. All right, so first item of business is going to be consideration of approval of the June 3rd, 2021 meeting minutes. I'm ready to entertain a motion if the board's ready.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes from the July 3rd meeting.
All right, motion made by Joel. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Frank. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, seeing none, minutes are approved unanimously. Are there any citizen comments? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion closed.
Motion made by Frank. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Seeing none, public comments closed. We'll move on to item number 1. It's going to be a variance request to allow for an encroachment of approximately 2 feet into a 5-foot side yard setback on the property located at 273 Stanley Park Lane in Franklin, Tennessee. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As stated, this is a variance request for the residential parcel at 273 Stanley Park Lane, located within the Fieldstone Farms subdivision. And the applicant is requesting a variance to construct an attached screened porch on the parcel within the required 5-foot side yard setback. Staff has reviewed this request for the 3 criteria as established by state law, the first of which requires uniqueness in shape or of topography of the lot in question, or some other extraordinary or exceptional situation which prevents the zoning ordinance from being followed as written. Staff found that there are no exceptional topographical conditions on the site, nor is the site exceptionally narrow or shallow. However, it could be said that there is uniqueness to the site because it is bound on 3 sides by public streets, and therefore has 3 front yards as defined by the zoning ordinance, and no space that feels like a true private backyard. Despite this relative uniqueness, the site can accommodate development as required by the zoning ordinance, and therefore staff will defer to the board as to whether or not this first criterion is met. The second criterion requires that exceptional practical difficulties or undue hardship occur if the zoning ordinance were to be followed. Staff believes that there are no significant practical difficulties nor hardship present, as the owner can continue to use the existing space present, or they can construct an enclosed porch that is 2 feet smaller and therefore does not encroach into the 5-yard setback, and therefore staff finds this criterion is not met. The final criterion requires that the relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good or without impairing the purpose of the zoning ordinance. While staff believes that the proposed porch would not be detrimental to the public good, we do believe that allowing for a principal structure to be expanded to 3 feet from a property line does impair the purpose of the intent of the zoning ordinance. 5 feet is the smallest setback requirement for detached residences within the city, and allowing for encroachment into that setback goes against the purpose of setbacks in order to protect citizens' properties and property values. Staff did receive a public comment from a neighboring property owner against this request, and that comment can be found in your packet along with the applicant's submitted materials. And because all of the criteria are not met for the applicant's request, staff recommends disapproval of this request. It also must be noted that staff is unable to determine whether the proposed porch would be within 10 feet of the neighboring principal structure. The Franklin zoning ordinance does not permit principal structures to be within 10 feet of each other, and therefore if the board decides that the encroachment requests meets all of the required findings, then staff does recommend a determination be made regarding to the appropriateness of the variance to FCO 3.10.7, which is that requirement for 10-foot separation of principal structures, just to ensure that the submitted plans can actually be constructed. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Eric. So next we'll move to the applicant, if you're present to represent this item.
Yeah, I'm here.
If you can just state your name for the record.
My name is Will Gamble, and I'm the owner of 273 Stanley Park Lane.
Perfect.
Yeah, I've been working through this project. We wanted to we've got a disjointed porch where part of it is high and part of it is low. We wanted to kind of bring together one common living area. The house my backyard is 15 feet from the property line, so kind of the first two components, this is not my expertise, but I kind of do think that there is no true backyard, and I'm trying to actually create a more private space for our family to enjoy. And I guess that while may not be a hardship to some, that it is a hardship to us and the property that we own. The third component, whether it's a substantial detriment to public good, I don't think so, but I'm not an expert on the zoning ordinance, so can't speak to that third bullet point.
Okay.
You know, we've gone through this process, and to a certain extent, I've worked with Eric. Eric's been very good and responsive and working through this with me. A little bit led to believe that it seemed like it may be a no-brainer to get this to push through and approved. So I did spend upwards of almost $1,000 to complete the paperwork and complete the request here. And so to get to this point and see that it's not approved at this point was a little bit of a setback to me. So just trying to work through this and make a little bit better home for us.
Okay. I'll ask a question. So on the staff's comment about the spacing between the structures, can you provide any insight on that as far as the application goes?
Yeah, would there be a 10-foot separation between structures? Yes, I could provide documentation of that. And before we do commence with work, if we're approved, we would definitely resurvey the land and make sure that everything is within tolerance of what we've requested.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
So next we'll open the public comment. Are there any citizen comments? I know we had one email sent in with the packet, so I did see that. Any other citizen comments? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close.
Motion made by Frank, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, so passes unanimously. Public comment is closed. Questions of staff from the board at all before we go into a motion?
Staff, I heard him say that he could provide documentation that there's 10 feet between the structures. Is that the only issue that you all have?
That was a secondary issue that came up just as staff was doing review. If that documentation is fine for our Building and Neighborhood Services, department, that's enough information that they need just to ensure that it's not 10 feet from the other structure, then there's no need to include any sort of determination on section 3.10.7. However, that is a separate issue than the encroachment into the 5-foot setback. So if documentation can be provided that it is 10 feet from the other structure, then we only need a decision on the setback encroachment as opposed to the setback encroachment and the 10-foot separation.
So my next question is, the 2-foot encroachment into the side yard setback, can this structure he's proposing to be built without the 2-foot intrusion into that setback?
It's staff opinion that yes, it would just be 2 feet narrower. It may not be exactly what the applicant wishes, however, it would not need a variance.
Thank you.
I'm ready to entertain a motion if a board member's ready.
What's the depth of the porch right now as drawn, Will?
It's about 12 feet.
So that'll put you at 10 feet if you were to deduct the 2 feet off of it.
Yeah, with eaves and overhangs, we'll pull 2 feet out of the interior space.
One more question. So it's still going to be 10 feet, the 10-foot thing. The concern was whether when this proposed structure is completed, will there still be 10 feet in between that and the house? Am I understanding that correctly? But we don't have confirmed surveying on that yet? This is just proposed on where they think?
The
property line is?
potential concern was that the neighboring property's house is also very close to that 5-yard setback. So staff wasn't able to determine with accuracy whether with a 2-foot encroachment, would the houses now be 7 feet apart as opposed to, or I'm sorry,
Right.
8 feet apart as opposed to 10 feet apart. But with the encroachment, if it can be proved that they are more than 10 feet apart, then there wouldn't be any potential issue with the zoning ordinance
That
in
makes
that
sense. So
regard.
the next step would be official surveying, correct? As a part of the construction? Because this is just based on, this house is set on here, not on an as-built survey. That's just proposed where they think it is, correct? Okay. So it would be that, the next step would be, surveying it to ensure that, I think I'd be willing to make a motion assuming that, how do we do it in a way that says that it has to be 10 feet at the end of that, I think that satisfies the concern of the neighbor, I would think too. Does that make sense?
And do we know that the neighbor has a proper side yard setback?
That's a good question too.
Because we have had them before that they were not properly set back.
From what staff was able to determine was that it was close, but it did not appear from our aerial imagery to the neighbor was encroaching into the setback. It was just potentially within 2 feet of the setback line. And that's where that concern came from. And I forgot the first part of your question.
To follow up a little on that, if the variance were to be approved tonight to encroach 2 feet into the 5-foot minimum setback, the 10-foot minimum distance between structures still applies.
Okay.
So if that would mean that then the building would be, say, 8 feet, for example, to the next structure, they would need to then come back and request a variance for that particular provision of the zoning ordinance.
Okay. So it still has to, it's going to still have to satisfy the 10 feet, basically, or they have to come back.
It would still have
Okay.
to satisfy the 10 feet. This variance approval would not impact that
Gotcha.
provision.
Gotcha.
So we don't have to mention that as a condition, then, is what you're telling me? Okay.
That's correct.
If you want to make a motion, Joel, feel free to, and then we can further discuss kind of once we have something on the floor.
Yeah, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion to approve the variance request. Based on that, I do think it's a hardship. And I think that as long as the 10 feet is maintained and that, that satisfies what I'm seeing here from the neighboring letter, which I think is important to consider their opinion as well, as they're backing right up to it.
Okay. Motion made for approval. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? I'm going to say no on that one. So it'll be 3-1. So item passes.
Mr. Chairman, my concern is always 3 roads, and you hit all the front yards.
Yeah. I think my concern there is the proximity, closeness. That's why I don't support it. Item passes, but I do have concerns over the separation there. I definitely don't think the board should approve a variance on 10 foot between structures. I think that's problematic. But item approved. So moving on, so we're going to, it's going to be item number 2. It's a variance request to allow for an accessory dwelling to be larger than 50% of the building footprint of the principal dwelling for the property located at 4105 Columbia Pike in Franklin, Tennessee. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As stated, this is a variance request for a 218-acre parcel located at 4105 Columbia Pike, commonly known as the Duke It Out Farm, and the property is zoned estate residential. And the applicant is requesting a variance to build an addition onto an existing accessory structure to allow for it to have a building footprint that is larger than 50% of the principal structure. The proposed addition would increase the building footprint from 1,119 square feet to 2,043 square feet, which is 81.85% of the existing principal structure's footprint. Staff has reviewed this request for the 3 required criteria as established by state law. The first of which requires uniqueness and shape of or topography of the lot in question, or some other extraordinary and exceptional situation which prevents the zoning ordinance from being followed as written. Staff found that an exceptional situation does exist on the property due to its history and its land use. The accessory structure is a caretaker's cottage that was actually constructed prior to the construction of what is now the principal home, making it the original dwelling on the site. Additionally, due to the location of the principal structure, the caretaker's cottage is the prominent dwelling when viewed from the road. Aside from the history of the site, the property is one of the few remaining true agricultural uses that exists within city limits, and staff views this as an exceptional situation because the caretaker's cottage would not exist on site, nor need remodel if the agricultural operation were not active. The second criterion requires that exceptional practical difficulties or undue hardship occur if the zoning ordinance were to be followed. And the applicant has provided documents indicating that extensive construction work would need to be done in order for the cottage to be able to structurally support a second story, which would provide the needed square footage without increasing the building footprint size. So therefore, staff believes that there are enough practical difficulties associated with this request, and therefore the criterion is met. The final criterion requires that relief may be granted without substantial detriment to the public good or without impairing the purpose of the zoning ordinance. Staff believes that an increase in the size of the caretaker's cottage would not be detrimental to the public good, nor impair the intent of the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance establishes these requirements to keep accessory structures subordinate to principal structures. However, because of the size of the parcel, the location of the cottage versus the principal structure, and the other accessory structures that exist on site for the agricultural operation, staff believes that this request does meet the intent of the ordinance, and therefore this criterion is met. And because all three of the criteria are met for the applicant's request, staff recommends approval of this request, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Eric. Is the applicant present? You guys could just state your name for us.
My name is Van Pond. I am the co-applicant on the application. I'm the architect for the project. This is a unique situation for us, and we appreciate staff's help navigating this. This is a tiny little house that was built as a primary residence on the farm. We have looked at different options to meet the criterion of a smaller footprint, but it's a 1,000 square foot or 1,100 square foot house that we're just adding some space for a new family to occupy the caretaker's cottage, which now is not going to be a single father and child, but 2 parents and 2 children. What we call the primary structure was built about 15 years ago, and it was built as a weekend dwelling for actually using the horse farm. So that's why it is not a large-scale dwelling. We appreciate your consideration, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. So next, we'll open the public comment portion of the meeting. Are there any citizen comments? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close.
Motion made by Frank, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. All in favor say aye. Aye. So public comment is closed. Questions from the board at all of staff? If not, I'm ready to entertain a motion, whenever you guys are ready.
Move to approve, Mr. Chairman, based on the 3 criteria had been met. And therein is and the fact that it is a farm, we're talking about 218 acres of land, and you've got a building there that was a principal residence, considered a principal residence, when certainly the land would support far more than that. Strict application would result in exceptional and particular difficulties or hardship to the owner. And number 3, such relief can be granted without any substantial detriment to the public good and without substantially impairing the purpose of the zoning ordinance.
So motion for approval made by Frank, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, seeing none, item 2 is approved unanimously. So item number 3, it's an appeal of an administrative decision regarding an interpretation of the floodway fringe overlay district, those boundaries based on a FEMA letter of map revision based on fill for the property located at Water's Edge, Section 6, in Franklin, Tennessee, map 106, parcel 18602. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As stated, this is an appeal of an administrative decision for the city's FFO boundaries for the Section 6 of the Water's Edge subdivision. The applicant has provided you with a new letter of map revision based on fill that was issued by FEMA, and is requesting that the board interpret the FFO boundary based on the FEMA-approved floodplain boundary change that is shown in the included letter. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, staff. Is the applicant present for the item?
Good evening. Kyle Griffin, CSDG, representing the owner of the property. This Water's Edge Section 6 development plan has been under construction for some time. All compensating cuts have been made and fills have been placed. We have surveyed this area and have found that all the grades meet what was expected of us. That information has been submitted to FEMA, and you have the Lumber F in your package. We just ask that you consider this FFL amendment and accept this documentation as our supporting documents.
Okay, thank you. So next, we'll open the public comment. Are there any citizen comments?
All right, my name is Kelly Hyatt. I'm at 4036 Flowing Creek in Water's Edge, so just down the street from Section 8, or Section 6. Just trying to understand better of if staff made an administrative decision not to change it, why that decision was made, and what has changed from what the staff decided.
Sure. Staff, could you guys kind of explain the process on the FFO boundary?
Absolutely. FEMA is charged with the floodplain boundaries. And so the applicant has done a study and gotten that approved through FEMA for certain cut and fill. It's really not a city determination at that point, at least in terms of staff. But that decision goes to the BZA to interpret the zoning boundaries. Because while the floodplain boundary is essentially changing because of the cut and fill that's proposed and has been approved by FEMA, it still shows up as the floodplain fringe overlay district on our zoning map. So the BZA is charged with interpreting map boundaries on the zoning map. So that's our public process for doing so, for getting the federal letter from FEMA, having our BZA interpret the zoning boundaries for the floodplain that align with the new FEMA boundaries.
So staff didn't have an objection to changing it, it was just, this is the process.
This is part of the process.
Okay, thank you.
We try to use best available data, and that comes from FEMA.
Okay, and this won't affect any of the existing residents, obviously, without our say on it, right?
No.
Can't,
not-
without our being the applicant. Okay, thank you.
Any other citizen comments? All right, seeing none, is there a motion to close the public comment?
Motion to close?
Motion made by Frank, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
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 Public comments closed. Ready to entertain a motion on this item if the board's ready.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the request because it now meets the new FEMA map standard as opposed to the original ones that were set by the city of Franklin. And that's my motion.
Okay. Motion for approval made by Joel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jeff. Sorry, I keep messing your name. I'm losing names here. Second by Jeff. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So anyone opposed? So item 3 passes as well. So last item is motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
So motion made by Jeff. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Joel. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
So we're adjourned.